Last week I started this with fourth period, but you guys will have to do this on your own. So I want you to think and have a discussion with somebody in your household. What qualities or characteristics would a person have to be considered great? Some of the things that we thought about in fourth period were that maybe they needed to be courageous, maybe they needed to be popular, to be skilled or talented in some area. So I want you to think and write down a list of things that somebody would have to be considered great. We even talked in fourth period about how sometimes brutality can make somebody great. Think about how being popular in high school can also equal brutality. So, Macedonia, this is where Alexander the Great was from. And that's who we were kind of leading into on our last slide, is that Alexander the Great is somebody who was given that title of great, and we're going to see the different qualities that he had that made him great. Some of those qualities were he had a belief in himself. He also had a belief system that led him to believe that he was destined to be great. Mythology really came into his belief system. Also, he learned from amazing tutors. So we're going to kind of see where he was from. He was from a place called Macedonia, and Macedonia was similar to Utah in that it was a mountainous region, had mountains that surrounded it, and then on the other side you had water, so it was fairly isolated. They spoke a language that wasn't Greek, so they were a little bit different than their neighbors. And so other people might have looked at them as maybe being a little bit backwards. So how is Macedonia like Utah? It was isolated. They had their own little quirks and characteristics. In fourth period, I was telling the kids that definitely people know that I'm from Idaho by the different sayings that I happen to use, like stop farting around. People in Utah, when I came to Utah to college and I had a roommate that was from back east, she definitely thought that we had some weird sayings like, oh my heck. You guys say that a lot in Utah. We also, if you guys have GPS, we say things differently than GPS does, like the town Hurricane. Other people would look at that word and say hurricane. Or Weber, the GPS says that as Weber. So we definitely have things that are a little different about us, and Macedonia did as well. So Alexander the Great had an amazing tutor. When he turned 13, he had Aristotle that became his tutor, and we've talked about Aristotle as one of our great ancient philosophers. Now, Aristotle taught Alexander that a hedonistic lifestyle was worthless, and what hedonism was this pleasure-oriented life, and that was associated with the Persians that were to the east of Macedonia. So Alexander got this political ideology that kind of got set where he looked at Persians as being hedonistic, which then equaled barbaric. So that meant that these Persians were destined in Alexander's mind, and taught by Aristotle to him, that they were destined to be taken over and controlled by Alexander and the Macedonians, because they were more enlightened. You had this idea of enlightenment with the Greeks, with these Greek philosophers. And one of the things that Aristotle taught Alexander was that barbarians by nature were meant to be slaves. That meant that everybody in Persia that Alexander did eventually end up conquering were, in his mind, meant to be slaves. They were meant to be ruled. And the enlightened Macedonians were meant to rule them. One of Alexander's major influences in his life and also his ideology and his belief system was his mother, Olympias. And on this slide, it's shown to be Angelina Jolie. So she taught Alexander from the time he was little that, in fact, it wasn't Philip, the king, who was Alexander's father, but Alexander was actually fathered by Zeus. And so he was divine, part God. And so that also led to his belief that he was meant to rule. And it also changed the way that he conducted his life. He looked outside of the box and thought outside of the box because he believed that he was divine and that he was powerful. So it also went to some other characteristics that he had, like courage. He was actually a pretty small boy. He wasn't big in stature. He was smaller than other kids, but he believed that his father was Zeus and he was divine, and so that went into fostering that courageous attitude. So I want you to take a minute and watch this YouTube link of Alexander and Bucephalus' first meeting. Bucephalus is the name of the horse. So take a moment and watch that. So I really like that clip. Hopefully you watched that, because it really does a great job of showing how Alexander thought. He was definitely tenacious. He wasn't afraid to put himself out there. And he had a father who actually, before this time, it didn't really show this in the clip, but before this time, Alexander was primarily raised just by his mother. His father really didn't have anything to do with him when he was little, because boys, like we talked about last week, until they were about 7, 8 years old, were solely raised by their mothers. So Olympias's influence was total. That's why he had such a foundation in mythology and in his belief in his own divinity. And then at this point, when he turns about 13, this is where his father takes over and really grooms him for leadership. And that's why he gets Aristotle to be his tutor. So this shows basically Alexander really gaining that acceptance from his father. He teaches Bucephalus, his horse, who becomes his companion for a long time. Shows that he teaches Bucephalus that it's really it's his shadow that he's afraid of, and that's why he's considered wild and untamable, and that it was really because of this fear. And Alexander helps him to get over that fear, and they become a team, and it's the start of his journey in leadership. Okay, so just a little bit of background on how Alexander becomes king. So his father is Philip, and Philip is poisoned. He's assassinated. And so at that time, Alexander becomes king of Macedonia, and he's about 19, 20 years old. And he decides that he's going to continue his father's legacy. Philip was actually a really great king. He had expanded the Macedonian Empire throughout Greece, and Alexander decides he's going to continue that, and he's going to invade Asia and defeat the Persian Empire, because remember, he believes that Persians are meant to be ruled because they're barbarians and they actually should be slaves. So eventually, if you look at this map, Alexander's empire extends through Greece, through Egypt, and into Asia and India. So one of the most famous stories of Alexander the Great is the story of the Gordian knot. So I want you to take a moment and watch that video that I have the link for. It's a little Phineas and Ferb video, and I want you to think while you watch it, what is the importance of the Gordian knot? What did Alexander really do to untie it? And the most important question I want you to think about is, why is this story significant? Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that Phineas and Ferb little clip. So what is the importance of the Gordian knot? It's this really complex knot that is untieable. And you have people that have tried forever to get this knot untied. Alexander comes up, and instead of trying to untie it with his hands, he cuts through it. So why is this significant? Any of us could just take a knife and cut through a knot. But when we have knots in our shoes, we take the time to untie it carefully and to make sure that we don't hurt the rope. Well, the reason why this is significant is because Alexander doesn't go through that process. He's like, I need to untie this knot. It's not really untieable. I'm going to look outside of the box for a different solution. So why not just cut it with a knife? It shows how he looked outside of the box. He didn't think in that same constricted way. So we're going to jump ahead. So Alexander is, he's going through Egypt, he conquers Egypt, and he is into Asia. So Alexander, because he conquers Egypt, he is considered on the same status as a pharaoh. And so he is in Egypt. He defeats the Persian Emperor Darius. He controls Syria, and he starts marching to Egypt, which is part of that Persian Empire. So he travels for a long time with some friends in the desert, and he becomes lost. He's traveling for like 300 miles. And when he arrives, he goes to an oracle, which is somebody who can prophesy of the future. It's this priest. So the oracle is thought to communicate with God and to tell prophecies about future events. So most people, including Alexander, believe that the gods are everywhere and that everything is controlled by the gods. And this goes back to his belief in mythology and that he is Zeus's son. And so he goes and he's wanting some advice from the oracle and to gain some wisdom. So the oracle tells Alexander and confirms to him, because remember at this point now he's been away from his mother for a while, and anytime we're away from our family, we start to have our beliefs alter and maybe expand or change a little bit. And so he is talking to the oracle, and it's confirmed to him that he is a god, he is divine. And so that reaffirms his belief in mythology and belief that he is divine. And the oracle also alludes to the fact that he is going to be master of all of the world. Okay, so I want to go over just a little bit of hedonism versus Hellenism, and this is important because it goes back to that political ideology. So a hedonistic lifestyle, according to Aristotle and what he taught Alexander, is a pleasure-filled lifestyle. You're basically seeking to avoid suffering, and this is viewed as a really human trait, right? Like this is natural to humans. We don't want to experience suffering, and so we try to avoid suffering. And this was the essence of Persian lifestyle. Avoid suffering. Pleasure is intrinsically good, not bad. It's not bad to enjoy ourselves. Now, to contrast this with a Hellenistic culture, which is what Alexander grew up in, Hellenism is marked by advances in learning and really focusing on the value of learning, right? And learning takes discipline. And it's not always pleasurable. We don't enjoy sitting in the same spot and learning. It's hard. But that is what Aristotle and those three original philosophers, that's what they focused on. It was a mixing of culture. So you had Aristotle that taught Alexander that, but he also educated him on other culture. And Alexander, in his learning and in his travels, he learned to appreciate the culture of other places. And he didn't really try to change them that much. He believed that he deserved to rule them because he was superior, but he didn't try to change everybody else's culture. And what he did was he tried to mix it. He tried to bring in that learning and that appreciation for learning and science and math, but he also wanted to let them keep their culture. So this Hellenistic culture, he helped to spread throughout Persia, and it made it so that his life and his empire was really marked by peace because he allowed those customs to continue. Okay, and then we're just going to jump ahead. Alexander, after conquering all these places, we are going to read next week about a famous speech that he gave. He learned a lot about inspiring speaking, right? He was an inspired orator. And he became very skilled at that, and he gave this famous speech. His army had been fighting for years and years. They were professional soldiers at this point, and they got to a point where they wanted to go home. And we're going to talk about a speech that he gave next week. But to finish off Alexander, they're in Persia, and there's a little bit of debate on how he died. Did he die of malaria? Did he die of a disease? Or did he die of poisoning? So we don't know, but there's two different schools of thought, because he had cheated death thousands of times with being wounded in battle, with illness that killed most men. So he really kind of got this idea that he was a little bit indestructible. But then there's this other school of thought that people think that he was poisoned because of how ambitious he was, and people did start to question his ideas and what he was doing, and why aren't we going home? So his life was marked by courage. It was marked by amazing feats of military genius, but it was also marked by brutality with who he conquered and who he subjugated. So, very interesting person to learn about, and I think what we take away from this is our beliefs really color what we think that we can do and what we do eventually accomplish. If we believe we can accomplish that, and we believe that we are foreordained to do these different things, then that makes it even more possible. What we think is right and what we think is wrong is taught to us by our beliefs, our belief system. Why do we think the way we think? Why do we think some things are right and some things are wrong? Where does that come from? So, hopefully you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about Alexander the Great. You guys are going to continue on with a little bit of philosophy in the activity that you do today. You're going to take our philosophers, take the teachings of Socrates and the importance of questioning, and you're going to answer questions. And the next time we get together on Microsoft Teams, we're going to have a very short 10-minute Socratic seminar. So go ahead and do that activity and email me any questions that you have, and we will talk soon. Okay, so next time that we get together, you guys will be having a short Socratic seminar. So your assignment for today is to go into Canvas. In the module that this presentation was in, it's called Power of Belief, and it has this week's dates, is an assignment that is called Short Philosophy Socratic Seminar, something like that. You need to go in there and you're going to just be answering questions. Now, what a Socratic seminar is, because remember Socrates, it was all about learning through asking questions. So you're going to answer the few questions that I have, but then you're going to be writing notes. So like if you have any other questions that come up, write those questions down, because when we are having our Socratic seminar, you will be asking each other questions and learning from each other's answers. And it's only going to be like a 10-minute conversation, so it's all about the participation. So you're going to want to really know what you think about the different questions that I ask. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that next time. But do the work and answer the questions on this assignment. And I think that that's it. See you guys next time.